So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Shane Stone, who's going to give a presentation on the kind of the current status of the SPP market and what the SPP market is. So thanks, Shane.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Let's see if we can. There we go.
What is your title? What do you do?
Plant coordinator here at Utilities. I spent most of my career out at the Whelan Energy Center, helping out various titles and positions out there. I recently moved up to the North Denver offices to help out with energy supply, analytics. I still help out with Micah on production. SPP is one of my main focuses right now is trying to get up to speed and see how we can best play in the market, be useful and utilize their resources, as well as how we can best offer our resources. All right, so the Southwest Power Pool, this slide here, I've got another one here to say what it is, but I just thought it was interesting that I believe it's over 14 states, and so it's that central region of the United States there, that picture.
1 second, Eric. Can you twist the screen, please?
Oh, there you go.
The glare is horrible. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. So SPP, Southwest Power Pool, is a regional transmission organization, an RTO. They're nonprofit mandated by FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, to ensure that power is supplied reliably and as affordably as possible on behalf of the ratepayers. SPP is headquartered out of Little Rock, Arkansas, so of that entire footprint there, they're just in that, obviously, the tiny southeast corner over there is where their headquarters is. But that's where they dispatch all of the power for that entire region, including us. We follow their signals as needed when we're generating. So the generation mix for that footprint, you've got your coal, gas. Gas is a combined cycle and simple cycle. Wind, nuclear, and hydro are the main items. There's a little bit of waste heat, but not much at all. But this one, over the years, since 2014, coal is almost 60% of the electricity in that mix, and now coal is about 25 to 28, depending on the year. But wind went from 15 to about 38% in that same time frame. And that's generation by technology, real time as it comes through. So that's actual generated megawatts. This is kind of a monthly view of that. One of the struggles with increased wind is that it blows strongest when the load is the lowest. And so you can see that in the March, April, May time frame, and then again in October, November, the wind peaks. And but in June, July, August, September, it's a lot lower there, and that's when those thermal conventional type resources really need to step up and make sure that we meet that demand for power, because that's when our peak demand is. Nameplate capacity, again, they've got some dates on there as of May of 25. At the top there was about 105,000 megawatts. But accredited capacity, the difference is accredited is what has been determined to be reliably expected to show up. Nameplate is just what can it do. The accredited is what's it gonna actually do. And you can see there that the wind is 34% of what it can do, right, of that entire mix, but only about 9% of what we can expect. Where coal is a little bit different there, 21% of nameplate, but 33%. Natural gas plays very well into that market.
For wind, it's going back to the demand, and then when it's easier to produce in the winter? Is that why it is so much lower on the accredited?
We can kind of come back to this when in the summertime when the wind doesn't blow, or anytime the wind doesn't blow is really what, so they take that into account. That's the ELC, oh boy, I better not use that acronym because I can't tell you what it is. It's the ELCC, expected load carrying capacity, I believe, of the variable energy resources, your wind, your solar. they cannot count on them at all times, and so that's what they allow them to be accredited for.
Yeah, that accredited capacity is a calculation that SPP's come up with, and it's been tweaked over the years. And the whole idea there is we know we have a lot of wind, so there's probably going to be some, so it should count for some capacity. But since we can't rely on it and can't control it, it can't be 100%, right? Because we know we can't just say, okay, wind, you're going to run today like you can for coal or gas. So with wind, they know there's value to the market. They're trying to figure out what they can reasonably rely on. So it's a continuing, evolving calculation. So
kind of to continue to talk about the impact of the renewables here. It's been a little bit since we've reached the peak. Renewable penetration is back in March of 22, but renewables, that was wind, solar, hydro, was 90% of all of the load demand in March of 2022. That's extreme. That is a very extreme amount to imagine. When that wind can drop, you may not have the resources there, but SPP does a good job of monitoring all of this and getting us set to take those swings in the resources. Wind specifically has about 35,000 megawatts installed in January this year. The maximum output of that 35,000 was just under 24,000. So at any given time, again, it's the entire footprint from northern Texas into North Dakota. But there are times, July of 2024, wind on that entire footprint was 181 megawatts. And so you've got that entire spread there. And there was a time in April of this year where wind fell off at a rate of 8,000 megawatts over 1 hour. And so they had to call up other resources to account for that. So it's definitely a balancing act that I'm glad I don't have to dispatch myself. So with wind in here, in the mix, and solar, mainly wind, they do have some subsidized payments for the generation. So they're able to offer at a negative price point. So the price point is all set on SPP based on your fuel input cost. You've got to have your fuel input cost at a minimum, and then it has to be set just at that profit mark. And since they have subsidies, they can go negative. And so this is just kind of a chart that that shows how many intervals. Explain the interval. I think they're 5-minute intervals is what SPP has. But as they combine these, how many intervals that there was negative prices in this last year, and then on the right side there, 22, 23, and 24. It's up to 30% of the time you've got negative price intervals in April. And so that makes it very difficult for the conventional resources to play in that market because we don't have a negative cost.
On the renewables, as we see things starting to change politically on the support and those things, what do you see coming down the pike for renewable energy and the impact it's going to have? Or is it too early to really know?
So me personally, I don't have a crystal ball or a whole lot of opinions on there. I do have a couple of slides later on that I've got some notes, but just since August, SPP is working really hard, and I'll just kind of jump ahead on this one. SPP is working really hard to make sure that we're hitting that reliability note, right? They do take very serious the reliability factor and then the most cost effective, right? And to use the resources that are available to do that. They've got a queue where you have to request to be studied for new generation, and we'll go into that a little bit more here. But just since August, when I put this together the first time, I checked it this morning, and almost 10,000 megawatts of wind generation that was in the queue and 5,000 megawatts of solar that was in the queue in August is no longer in there, and it was not pushed through as an interconnection agreement so that that's telling me that they've pulled out of the studies at the moment. So I've seen that in the month here, and that's just on the public-facing website of SPP here. So there's also been an increase in thermal, mainly natural gas. So there is absolutely going to be an impact. This just, again, kind of highlights that the demand during the day. So your net demand is that center, that center light blue line. That's net of, excuse me, I apologize on that. That's the net demand. That's what we need to cover to meet the actual demand. But the wind generation is lowest during the day when the peak is typically highest, is really what that's supposed to show for us there. This is, I gave part of this presentation to Rotary back in August, and this was that morning of, just to kind of show, and these are very, very tiny, but to kind of explain what that is. Obviously, it's a generation mix on the pie chart there. Your largest is natural gas in the yellow, the coal is blue. But it's down at the very bottom there, that chart, or that graph, is the top line is the load demand for the entire SPP footprint. And the bottom line there, that bottom green line, or not the very bottom, but the green line is wind. So that wind generation at that point was just about 1,500 megawatts is all that was on that system. And we peaked about 53,000 megawatts on the grid this year, and so that day was about 52,000. So just about our peak demand this last summer, wind was only about 1,500 megawatts of that. And so you've got a lot of thermal and coal that has to, or natural gas and coal thermal mix. Nuclear is standard, it's on, right? That has to pick up that difference. So that was just kind of an interesting. So we've got some future challenges, future and current SPP challenges, and kind of what they're looking at, I guess, as a whole, and it plays very much into what we're looking at as a utility as well. Age of resource, Micah was given some presentations here earlier this year. I know I've talked about performance-based accreditation myself to the board here, but age of resource is not just a Hastings issue, it is an SPP issue. At the end of 2024, 42% of SPP's generation fleet was more than 30 years old. Of that, 86% of coal capacity and 43% of natural gas capacity is older than 30 years. And according to the Energy Information Administration, the EIA, the national average retirement age of coal-fired generation in 2024 was 50 years. And so that's 86% of coal capacity on the SPP market, and 43% is likely to retire within 20 years. The largest source of new capacity over the last 10 years has been wind. There was a footnote in there that Nebraska's thermal generation entered in 2009, which would have, I didn't look this up directly, would have been Nebraska City Unit 2, I believe, and then Whelan Unit 2 would have been 2009, 2010. But beyond those, it's been, the majority has been wind. So that conventional capacity, that thermal capacity, the thermal, both gas, nuclear, and coal, your blue line is the availability for that capacity. It's what we've got. That's what showed up. It's what can cover. The light blue line is the load demand and the contingency reserve. And so that is the load demand contingency reserve. SPP has to have a certain amount of extra to be able to call on when resources dive off or when new loads come on quickly. They've got to be able to cover that demand. Electricity is a net zero, so to speak. You've got to have a load to take the generation, and that's where the prices swing and a bunch of different things because of transmission. But there are intervals you can see there, especially in the summertime. There was one in January where that interval was, where the light blue was above the dark blue, but there's a number of times in the summer where conventional cannot cover that entire need. And so what do they do there? They can rely on the renewables. We can also rely on the neighbors. MISO, the Midwest, I got another slide with some more information on that too, but, and ERCOT down in Texas, we can export power to the east. There's not a lot that we can do to the west side. It's called the Western Interconnect. There's just not a lot of connection between the two at the moment. But that's just one of the challenges that they face right now, is that if there were no renewables, the conventional is less than the load demand in a lot of intervals.
Shane, if you go back to that slide, this is what's become really important within SPP since the February 2021 event, where we were short energy. There was concerns about, we started to cut off feeders at a certain point. We were trying to conserve to make sure that we didn't, the whole grid didn't go down. You see news articles with SPP, which is attached to ERCOT, which ERCOT is most of Texas, where ERCOT got into some real issues to where they were starting to lose portions of their grid because they didn't have enough capacity to cover that. Like Shane said, we can rely on our neighbors, but when you get an event that hits us and stretches over there into Iowa, Illinois, now you're impacting MISO, so now we're both in trouble. So where do we go to pull that? So the rules have changed. It's part of the reason why Shane's putting so much emphasis on looking into what we have to do. SPP's requiring more capacity for winter months so that we don't run into this, which again, you get into the challenges of, if you're a winter peaking utility, that means you have to carry more capacity than traditionally you had to. We're seeing MPPD, OPPD, LES, Grand Island's board just announced they're going to move forward with some natural gas generation. Everybody's trying to build out capacity, knowing that SPP's in the belief that they don't know how much we need, but we don't have enough. And so they're trying to get ahead of this. Data centers have become a, I'm going to say some people view them as an opportunity. They're also viewed as a little bit of a concern. If they're not curtailable, they're using up a huge amount of electricity, where if we can't turn those down, we have to figure out how to supplement those and something else. Governor just came out last week, stated that he feels that Nebraska has done their fair share of data mining, data servers, so he doesn't want to see any more move to the state of Nebraska. It'll be interesting to see where that goes, but there are some real challenges. So it's good that SPP is paying attention to this. We don't get paid to sit and be ready in the market. And as Shane talks about, wind going to 90% and then to 8%, we have to have something to offset that. If we have something that starts really fast and can shut down really fast, that works really well. Unfortunately, our two biggest assets don't do that. They don't start up really fast and they don't shut down really fast, and we can't turn them down that fast. So trying to figure out how to balance those in the market. When is the right time to eat negative pricing through a period so that when it comes back, we're good there? The benefit of having units like that is, because of this, SPP's realizing they have a capacity concern. We're all responsible for owning a certain amount of capacity, whether it's the assets or assets on paper, to cover our load. So what that does is, there's a shortage of that right now. So now all of our capacity has value. So you take units 4 and 5, and this is really what's played in, although they've ran a lot more than we ever thought they were going to. Bringing those back was a capacity play, to where people needed to show that there was enough generation if it needed to be called upon. So by having assets like that that are sitting there waiting, now we're getting paid for that. Where 4 or 5 years ago, before the February event, we didn't really get paid just to have assets ready. So Hastings is in a really good position, as we have more excess capacity than we need, and we contract and market that out so it doesn't go to waste. But on the flip side of that, as Shane's talking about here, ours is aging, and we're to the point where we're going to have to start making some decisions. So thanks, Shane.
Question for either one of you, but is gas becoming our most reliable and quickest to fire up than over coal? Is that kind of changing? Or are we running a new pipeline?
It's absolutely the quickest firing. There is no quick start coal units to that end. But as of right now, they continue to build out. They're looking into the gas supply. I guess in our region, Nebraska region, I guess I haven't heard anything about natural gas supply being curtailed or people being turned away at this point. But I haven't heard of any large natural gas projects being undertaken as well to support this.
Micah can comment a little bit to this. I know that LES got some fairly large projects going in. MPPD's got a few more natural gas units. What was passed in our budget, our budget that we are currently now in, we're investing quite a bit of money in redoing the DCS at Don Henry. Don Henry is our only quick start natural gas unit. It can get called upon and online within.
Right now, we set it to an hour, but then that's our hour lead time on that one is mainly due because we don't staff it 24/7. So we have to make sure that we have an operator out there to be able to, but by the time that we start the startup process, I think it's about 15 minutes on that one, and that's an older technology. The newer gas turbines, the simple cycle, 5 minutes or less. The recips, which are essentially just a large reciprocating engine, those are a matter of under a minute on some of those. They can be online, and then within 5 minutes to peak load.
Bill, you hit on a really good point, though, because the issue with all this push towards natural gas is when we get into winter months, when we have a February event, gas is going to be prioritized towards keeping people safe, keeping people warm. So that's where our priority goes. With our gas system, we're going to take units, derate them, or bring them offline before we start taking gas from the residents that go to their homes. With that said, though, that's why we have done the big push last year, and we'll continue again, money in the budget to convert 4 and 5 to go back to being dual fuel. We can store fuel oil. We can store it fairly easily. There's some challenges there with keeping it fresh, but at the end of the day, that's our backup plan for if our natural gas starts to get curtailed or we run into a weather event. That fuel oil can pay for itself very quickly in a February 21 or a December 23 event. So that's kind of what you're seeing now, is you're seeing a lot of people build gas units, but having them be dual fuel, so they have the backup of fuel oil, which is essentially diesel fuel. That's the way Grand Island's going to go. I don't know if MPPD, where they ended up going with theirs, but there's a substantial amount of gas generation that's going to be going in here over the next 5 years.
I know a lot of the new generation that's being built by MPPD, OPPD, those units all come standard as a dual fuel option, or even mixed fuels as we look towards the future of like hydrogen and stuff like that. So.
I've got just 2 more questions on it, but since we're all, the 14 states and the SPP, to avoid what happened back in that February tough winter, Texas, they're all under the same regulations, is that correct? Because I think, wasn't it, some of the issue was Texas didn't plan for that and wasn't under those regulations, and therefore we had to help them out? Is that kind of my understanding? But we're all 14 states have to follow the regulations that are set by SPP, correct?
Texas kind of does their own thing. ERCOT's an interesting market. It doesn't have a lot of ties to anybody else, and the idea of ERCOT is more of a capitalistic, a free market. And in theory, it's great because the idea is that we're not going to dictate, Texas is not going to dictate what type of generation needs to be built, how much of it's going to be built. It's all going to be built off supply and demand. So if the price gets high enough, it's going to incentivize somebody, well, I'm going to build a unit because I know I can make money. The problem that they ran into is that happened all overnight, right? And so when all of a sudden they didn't have enough, prices skyrocketed, you can't build it overnight, so now they need to bring it from somewhere else. Well, they're fairly isolated, so they didn't have a lot of ties to bring in from SPP or MISO. Since then, they've built some ties. But it was the challenge of where that market where there was no real governance of how much capacity you had to hold, they didn't have enough. SPP, even though they had that, they also ran into where they almost didn't have enough. You know, we were borrowing from neighbors. We were trying to push down to ERCOT for a period of time, and that storm, if I remember right, kind of was a slower moving one, so it gave a little bit of time, so it didn't hit us and MISO hard at the same time. But those are the challenges, and I think that's why, while SPP is pushing capacity and the need for capacity, it has created a demand for gas turbines that cannot be filled in an immediate time. I think we're hearing right now, if we started this process, if we made the decision today, we'd be lucky to have a gas unit here and online within 7 years. When you look at the age of our infrastructure, you know, we feel pretty confident right now, but if it takes 7 years to get there, we have to be looking at, okay, where are we in 10 years and what do we need there? So that's why the money's in the budget to start evaluating this. That's why Shane's working with SPP and our partners to try to figure out where we go from here. We're not the only community that's feeling this. We're one of the few communities that's at least in a spot to where we don't need capacity now. There's a lot of them that do. We're hopeful that we'll see some growth, some generation. I mean, once our new neighbor to the out on Highway 6 there fires up, that's going to eat into some of that capacity, but that's a good thing. That's what we want. That's what that capacity is there for. So challenges ahead, and hopefully this helps with future presentations we're going to give of how we go forward and making some decisions.
Kind of piggyback on a lot of all of that discussion we just had. So this is, all of these graphs, charts, things are from SPP reports or from their website directly. This queue, I know things are very small there. I'll just kind of talk about it high level. In the very center, there are active projects by year megawatt, that little square in the center top. That's what the entire footprint had in for future generation, period, whether it was renewables, thermal, didn't matter what it was. In 2023, there was only 28,000 megawatts added to the queue that year. There was 10,000 in 21, 8,000 in 22, 28 and 23. In 23, there was only about 3,000 megawatts of thermal in that queue. Come along 2024, we started talking about this resource or the excess capacity, the performance-based accreditation, having to carry capacity in the winter, different than in the summer. All of those things that we've talked about a little bit in the past year, past meetings. That's your response from the generation owners, the load responsible entities, you know, utilities throughout the footprint there. In 24, they added 100,000, and 29,000 of that was thermal. And so that's really what we're trying to do as utilities across the board, you know, power generation, is trying to get into these queues. Again, this queue here is, you know, we want to build a generator. We have to submit all the information to SPP. Here's a generator. Here's what we're looking to build. And then they have to study that to make sure that the transmission system, again, they're mainly a transmission authority, can handle that. And then what upgrades would they need for the transmission? Because again, you have to be able to get the load, the electricity from the generator to the load. And so they're studying this, and every time there's a new generator in there, they've got to factor that in. So they do it in queues. They only allow like one or two, I think, per year study clusters. So they study them at a time. But every time there's a new cluster, they've got to go back. So it takes some time. They're trying really hard to streamline that. They're working through a new process that they're going to roll out next year called the consolidated planning process. That's going to take this generation interconnection queue and the transmission planning. And you would think they're together now, but they're not. They do the generation and then the interconnect, but they're going to combine all of that. And so hopefully this will speed that up. But just that increase year over year is astounding for reaction from load responsible entities, you know, utilities, those that serve customers, are trying to get new generation put up. This is just Nebraska. You can filter this by Nebraska alone. So in Nebraska in 23, there was 2,100 megawatts of thermal listed. In 24, another 2,700 megawatts was listed at that point. So Currently, there's about 6,000 megawatts of thermal, 3,500 megawatts of wind, and 3,700 megawatts of solar in the queue here for Nebraska. Solar is interesting. We're kind of waiting for it to take off. Is it going to take off full scale, large scale like it has in other areas or not? Because that one graph that I showed you, the solar down at the bottom, right now on the entire SPP footprint, the peak solar is just over 1,000 megawatts for the whole grid. And so, you know, Nebraska has 3,700 being studied in the queue right now alone. The entire grid was higher than that. So I'm curious to see what that'll go, but that's just a curiosity of mine. This is the executed interconnect agreements, and this plays to what Derek was saying. You know, just because you want to build it, it's not going to get built immediately. But this is the total amount that they have approved to be built. This does not necessarily mean that it can be, but this is what has come through all the studies and said, hey, this is going to work. So they've got, I didn't get my note put on there, but very low amount of thermal. It's that brown color obviously on your pie chart there, but there is a large number of solar, about 10,000 megawatts of solar, and about 12,500 or so of wind that has been approved at this point in the entire footprint. In Nebraska's footprint, there is no thermal as of this morning, even when I looked, actually approved. And that's really interesting because, as Derek said, you've got OPPD, LES, MPPD, all building generation or converting generation. I know there are thermal projects being built right now that they're not approved through SPP at the moment, but that's because you have to, if you need it, you've got to move. And so the approve is really just dictating or letting you know what transmission upgrades you're going to need is really what that
And
is.
I think that's an important point to clarify. SPP was, the integrated market was made to get customers the best value for the power that was out there. So wind really has precedent because it's $0 fuel cost, or sometimes negative because of the subsidies. So as SPP decides which units are going to run, some of these they don't have any control over. If the wind's blowing, it's going to have precedence. If the sun's shining, that's going to have precedence. But really, SPP's focus outside of the capacity is transmission. And so what they have to do is they have to study every time a generation wants to be developed somewhere, making certain that that transmission has a way to get that out to a load. Some entities realizing that they're already in a crunch. If you go back and watch OPPD's last board meeting, MPPD's a couple months ago, they know they're going to be short. They know that they're going to have to do some transmission upgrades. SPP will tell them what, but they didn't want to wait until SPP gave them the authority to say, yes, you're good, or no, you need to do this. As far as they viewed it as, we don't have an option. We have to build this regardless. So no matter what we're going to have to do on the transmission side, we need the generation. They do some internal studies on where they want to put this generation. They've got an idea of how SPP looks at it, but ultimately they know that SPP is going to come back and say, hey, in order for this to be brought online, you're going to have to upgrade these transmission lines. It's an unknown cost, which is a little bit of a scary thought, but at the end of the day, they don't see an alternative because they know they are behind in what they need for capacity. So.
Great summary on that. Thank you, Derek. So we'd mentioned a little bit the neighbors here. You've got ERCOT, Electric Reliability Council in Texas, MISO is the Mid-Continent ISO there. They're all the system operators. So those are the two biggest ones that we've got next to us. So there's always going to be some sort of an import-export on that. SPP generally has been a net exporter as a whole. We push more than we draw in. But on the right side of that graph there, starting in 22 to 24, you can see that that gray line, that net line, has slowly decreased fairly quickly. It's a fairly small amount of megawatt hours on that, but it is decreasing to that end. And some of that has to do with wind production. It has to do with the low-cost natural gas for Texas. All of the different parameters all play a factor in that. But historically, we have had enough to help cover our neighbors, I guess, to that end as a whole. Another challenge SPP has, and this is the one that we've talked about a few times here, is the new policies for reliability. Our seasonal capacity accreditation. Currently this year in 2025, we have one capacity number for summer and winter. Starting next year in summer of 26 and then winter of 26-27, we're gonna have two different capacity values that we have to carry. It's increased in the winter due to fuel assurance. That's based on performance-based accreditation and fuel assurance as well. The fuel assurance is only in the wintertime, but that does make it a much higher number that we have to derate those units, or not derate the units, but that we can't count on the amount of capacity for those units. The performance-based accreditation portion, really in the summertime, it starts at 16% next year and 36, I believe, in the winter next year, 36% excess. So if we had easy numbers, 100 megawatt load, which is very, very close, 100 megawatt load, we have to carry 116% in the summer, 116 megawatts, 136 in the winter. But with the performance-based accreditation, what they've been able to do is make an adjustment on that based on actual performance. In the past, it's just been that nameplate capacity, like we showed on that one of the earliest slides. And of that nameplate, that's what they would want you to have to run for your capacity. Now it's performance-based, so the better, more reliable your units are, the higher amount that we can count on those units. And we've spent a lot of money, a lot of effort, and pushes to make sure that we've been reliable, especially for the WEC units that run continuously throughout the year, outside of outages. WEC 2 comes into play with economic outages or economic downtime. We do put that in market status some. But those units are very reliable, and since we brought 4 and 5 back in to service and offered them in, they've been very reliable as well. Don Henry. So we're fortunate. We are well below the class averages for each of those coal, natural gas, and steam-fired natural gas units. So this is a slide I stole straight from one of Micah's presentations before. So what can Hastings do? We can do nothing. We can just wait, operate the units that we have, and see what happens. Obviously we've got older units. We talked about that. There's always the regulatory, the environmental regulatory impacts that might drive decisions for units that we have. Convert Unit 1 to natural gas. Like Derek mentioned, we do have the monies in the budget this year to do a refresh on the natural gas study, get some more details for WEC 1. We are moving forward with one for WEC 2 as well, to see what those would look like. New generation, what are we looking, in the future? Like Bill mentioned, those quick start natural gas units play really well against the renewables, to help cover that. Is that the direction that we want to go? Or are we looking to something that we want to run, just to cover those demands? Or do we have something we want to run more of a baseload type unit? And is that a good economic decision? Other options there, solar, battery storage, SMRs. There's been talk of the nuclear options through here. That's been discussed a number of times. What are we looking at? But they all come with their considerations, the higher capital investments, but the long-term planning solutions. So we really do need to continue to evaluate at a quick pace, because like Derek said, if we wanted to build something today, it might be 5 to 7 years before we could have it. So we'll just continue to evaluate on that. That's all I've got for the presentation. Any more questions in general?
I know we discussed earlier that we had some in the budget for evaluation. Can you maybe give us a little bit more details just for the public on how that's going to proceed, or the dollar amount that we're going to look at for evaluating this year?
We had,
I can talk a little bit about that. So what was put in there initially was the discussion of, we have several locations to where if we wanted to add gas generation, it makes sense. Obviously, one of those is out at the Energy Center. Another one being the land that was purchased north of the landfill there. Some of the funds there were the high level working with engineering to try to evaluate what sites might make the most sense for us moving forward. We do have a study, although it's dated, on what it would take to convert Unit 1 to natural gas. As Shane mentioned, PPGA has money in their current budget to evaluate what it would take to convert Unit 2 to natural gas. So we're kind of waiting to see how that one plays out. We also want to evaluate some of the other things that have, as Bill brought up earlier, have changed as far as what's available. But solar and battery storage still make a little bit of sense because of how we operate and where we're located. Luckily, we have a couple solar fields that have given us some options. Wind is really tough for us because we can't put it in our footprint, which means we're doing a PPA, and when that pricing is going negative and you're paying somebody, that can be a real challenge for us. Small modular reactors, we are still part of the conversation with the MPPD study for the state. Their goal actually is to have that report wrapped up by the end of this year, first part of next year. And they're hoping to narrow it down to 2 to 4 sites is what they're looking at. And then they'll turn that back over to the state, and then the state will decide what they want to go there. The state would really like to build 1 or 2 nuclear units and get it to be some sort of joint operating agreement between multiple public utilities within the state. Obviously, there's some economic benefits for having something like that close to you, but there's also some challenges of how the public views that, which through ours I think went fairly good. So with the money that's currently in the budget, it was written in a way to where we want to evaluate. We're still waiting for some rules with coal to they're stayed right now, I guess would be the best way to put it. We think that they'll be repealed, pulled back, which gives us some options there. If those rules would happen to stay, we're going to have some real challenges on what we have to do for carbon capture. So that would probably drive us one way. Not knowing where solar was going to play out with some of the incentives there, now that those are dead, that's probably not a directive. So when we presented that with the budget, there was, I think, 4 or 5 different options of potential places we could look. But as these rules continue to evolve, that'll probably shift, and we'll be working with engineering on that. So,
With the changes in political environment, it's got to be very difficult where a build out is, 7, 10, 20 years, depending on what you're looking at, where politics every 4 years can flip. So it's got to be tough.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges, and Hastings has done well with, I believe, some of the decisions they've made in the past. I think for the public, it comes across when you see an option to do nothing, it kind of gives a negative connotation, but the reality is sometimes doing nothing is the right decision. After you've evaluated everything, and the last thing we want to do is spend ratepayer money to build something that in 3-4 years is not going to be usable or regulated to the point where it's going to cost us 2-3 times as much. We aren't that many years away from where the discussion was more regulations on natural gas units. And of course, that's rolled back now with the demand being so high, we have to get energy from somewhere. If nuclear takes off, I think that you're gonna see a lot of that shift back and some incentive there, but nuclear, you're at least 5 to 10 times the average megawatt cost of what we're able to produce right now. So that becomes very challenging for everybody. We don't want to see rates go up any higher than they absolutely have to, but there's some real challenges coming. So,
Unless there's subsidies for the nuclear, but even if we were chosen as a site for nuclear, you're still looking at 8 to 10 years out. And in the meantime, we still have to have our plans in place to make sure our facilities and what we have are up to date and still being able to supply the reliability that we expect.
Well said. And I think that that's where here over the next few months, we'll be bringing different things in front of the board. We've got some real opportunities here. There's challenges, but at the same point, we're not in a situation to where we have to make our decision and move now. We've got the ability to have a little bit of flexibility due to the assets that we currently have, but we're within that window to where within the next 2-3 years, we need to be making a decision on how we want to transition to our next form of generation if we want to continue to be a generating utility, which has really served the city of Hastings well over the years. So,
My last question with SPP. You have a seat at the table, is that correct, Derek? But we're not a voting member.
yeah, so with SPP, it's basically, it's more geared towards transmission. Hastings, Grand Island, there might be 1 or 2 more of us. Those are the only 2 I know. We're unique in that we own our own transmission, tied to our own generation, tied to our own customer load. So we're our own little box, and because of that, we never became network transmission owners within SPP. We're not pulling power from North Dakota or Oklahoma most of the time. Most of the time it's coming from right here. So we were able to, when the integrated market happened in 2014, make an agreement with them that as long as we are generating more than our city load, we don't have to pay for transmission because it's our transmission. On the flip side of that, that means that nobody else is paying to use our transmission, which MPPD ties to us 4 or 5 different ways. So they're always sending energy through us. So we don't get paid for that, but we do get the benefit of we don't have to pay for transmission unless we're not there. What that did, though, is most of the committees that were formed within SPP were formed off of transmission decisions, so we weren't in those conversations. Part of the reason we've brought Shane over and put him in that role is, one, he's a fairly good-sized person, so getting up to a table, he can nudge right in there, but we're trying very hard to become part of those conversations, even if we don't necessarily at this time have a vote. If we're there, if we're listening, they've been very good about allowing us to give our opinions, our concerns, from what I'm gathering from Shane. Shane talked about that too, but they've been very receptive of the situations we're in. Long term, there's probably a realistic chance that we need to look at becoming a NITS member, because as these coal units spend more time off, we're having to buy more transmission on spot price instead of getting the membership discount, so to speak. I know Grand Island's already working towards that as they look for their possibility of transitioning away from Platt, their coal unit up there. So there's a lot of moving pieces right now as SPP's still trying to sort out what they have. Every utility's trying to sort out what they have, but no, you're right in that we're trying to be a lot more active in that field, because the only way they're gonna know when they're creating these rules what impact it has on us is if we tell them, so.
Maybe to piggyback on that just a little bit, so they've got a bunch of different working groups, and the supply adequacy working group is one, obviously, for supply adequacy. They're the ones that were formed for the performance-based accreditation, all of that. We hadn't been active as others, in that when they were making decisions over the last few years, but back in January, February timeframe, when Jason and I really dug into this and started getting in there, we had a few questions, and we reached out to SPP, and like Derek said, definitely open. They said, yeah, send us your questions, we'll get you on the agenda and let you speak. And so all of these working groups, they allow the stakeholders, which is everybody who is in that red member, whether you're a load serving entity or just a generator, they're very receptive to comments. You can raise your hand in these meetings at any time, but they actually put us on the agenda. We were able to ask a few questions, and they were really good about getting us the answers back. And then working directly with SPP on a number of items, they've been really supportive for us. So it's been a good 6, 7 months, 8 months here, getting up to speed and jumping right in with this.
Thanks, Shane. With that, we can move over. Micah's going to give an update on the fall outages out at WEC.
Single slide on this one. Oh, good morning, everyone. Yeah, just give you a quick update on we're in that fall outage season. As a reminder, we take with each of our coal units, we take 2 planned outages a year. We try to schedule those for our shoulder months where the demand is a little bit lower. The pricing is weak for us, so it's more of an opportunity for us on those. And I'll also give you a quick overview of how the summer went for operation. All our units operated fairly well. Our WEC units did well. We did have a few excursions on the WEC 2 side. In related, we had a couple instrumentation failures that ended up taking the plant offline. I think we had a lightning strike in August that took out our ID fan, so one of our largest pieces of equipment critical to the plant operation. That took the plant offline, and then we had a couple of excursions where we had to drop down to minimum load. But credit to the staff out there, working hard, working through those issues. We're in all those scenarios. We are able to get the unit back online and in full capacity within 24 hours. NDS 4 was called up 3 times over the summer. NDS 5 was called up 4 times. We're seeing a little bit of a decrease from what we've seen in the last couple years, but we did see that Don Henry kind of picked up its operation again, and it was 18 call-ups for Don Henry this summer in our peak summer months, and I think we're at 25 total this year. Our total operation for Don Henry last year was somewhere closer to 19. So we're seeing Don Henry kind of pick up a little bit more in its operation, and then the NDS units not being called up quite as much. As Derek said, we're continuing to move forward with the dual fuel operation project there at the NDS units, and we'll be kind of refocusing back on that after we get done with our fall outages out at the WEC units. For our fall outages, kind of our major pushes and projects out there, WEC 1, we had 2 separate outages. We kind of had to split it up, but we had a real short one earlier in the fall. We have to put in our air preheat coils that preheats air before it comes into the boiler. So we had to do that earlier in the fall. We needed a little bit more time, but we didn't have the availability through SPP to request that. So we had to kind of split them up a little bit. So we have a longer one later this fall, but we also replaced our generator brushes. The generator brushes are what provide your DC current to your generator. So you have your stator, or I'm sorry, your rotor that spins inside your stator. So you have to have brushes that make contact with that rotating piece of equipment and provide your DC current that provide your electromagnetic field for the electric generation magic to happen there. So those were something that we needed to address. We were kind of replacing those brushes one at a time while the unit was online. We went and redid that whole setup there. Fly ash silo project, again, that was a regulation-driven project where we can no longer use water to convey ash out of our plant. So this will be a dry system, but what it also has opened it up is that we can now market our fly ash, and there is a market out there. So we're looking where we've had to, once we would sluice the ash out to a pond, we had to pay for the removal of it, and now we can market the dry fly ash. And so we're seeing from an expense to a revenue flip of hopefully somewhere anywhere between $500,000 to $800,000 a year, and so that'll be a nice flip. So finishing up that project, you can see that silo is new there on the right, and we hope to have that finished and operational by the end of this outage, which the Unit 1 outage is from November 7th to December 4th. And bottom ash bunker project, just got some updates on this. We're kind of reevaluating we went out for bids on that. Some of our bids came in a little bit higher than we expected, and also some longer lead times on materials. So we're going back. We're going to try to do what we can. Our biggest issue is that although it's a dry conveyor system for our bottom ash, that bottom ash still has moisture in it. And so that was a new system put in. So last winter, at the first day that we hit 22 degrees, we experienced freezing on that conveyor system. So we had to do some little bit of plant engineering there to block some of that wind and provide some heating for that conveyor, but it was only a short-term solution. So we're going to move forward with a few parts of that project, but putting the total enclosure around that bunker itself, we may have to kind of go and reevaluate that and reevaluate the cost and what's necessary to move that project forward. On WEC 2, we got quite a bit going on. We're currently in outage. We did put it in market last week, got called off a little earlier than our planned outage, so we went into outage starting on Thursday, and that outage will go through to November 7th. So right when that outage ends, our WEC 1 outage begins. Some of the major things there, we have B elevation burners. So this will be the last elevation of the 3 elevations of burners that we'll be replacing out at WEC 2. So that'll be good and help with our boiler efficiency on that one, and have that new sets of burners. That's kind of been an ordeal over the last couple years of getting all those. That's a kind of a major undertaking of replacing those burners. Cooling tower fill replacement. This is another one that as we kind of get close to the project, we hit a few bumps in the road. We had that scheduled for this fall outage. Once that fill was received by the contractor that was doing that project, they had to reject it because it was a damaged product. So we're working hard to see if we can get that project still completed this fall, and they're looking for new sources for that cooling tower fill. We got a stack inspection, just kind of make sure that our stack is still in good condition. Aux boiler project, you can see down there to the bottom left. Spoke about this previously. I think the last picture I provided was just the boiler sitting on the pad itself. We now actually have a building around it. We're getting a lot closer to completion on that project. We're making some of the tie-ins in this outage, and then we hope to be doing some steam blows with all that steam piping and the welding and the machining that takes place to prevent any contamination and any particles that could end up in your steam path and eventually end up in your turbine. You do steam blows to kind of clean out those lines. So we're hoping to do some steam blows at the end of this outage and have a substantial completion on that project by later this year or early next year. And then extensive pulverizer PM. So that's just kind of a standard thing once we get an opportunity to get in those our coal pulverizers and do our PMs when we can't do those while that's online. And that's about it for our outage and our summer operation.
Thanks, Micah. I think one interesting thing that we kind of probably haven't brought a lot of attention to with our fly ash, engineering and environmental engineering have worked really hard for a lot of years to create a market there. And with the regulations of making it dry, there has developed somewhat of a market to where something that we were paying to get rid of it has now turned into something to where we get paid for them to take it. So we have, and once it leaves the site, it's no longer fly ash, it's beneficial fill is my understanding. So we're now have a beneficial fill facility with a byproduct of electricity, it sounds like. So it's a cool story.